Okay, I think we already said once that sometimes you say Boker Tov, good morning and good week, and you say it as a description, and sometimes you say it as a prayer. And unfortunately, I think this morning it's more of a prayer. Or Bezrat Hashem, we should have a better and a more peaceful and quiet morning and week and year and life. Bezrat Hashem. Okay, so we are in a mini-series as a preparation for Pesach about growth from crisis to growth, and unfortunately it's very relevant to our times. Last week we spoke about Birkat HaIlanot, as you may remember, and this week I want to speak about Matzah. While we were in Toronto, in Shlichut, I gave a shiur in the shul there in Clinton Park, if someone knows. I gave a shiur, and I spoke about it before Pesach. I spoke about Matzah and Matzah and Matzah, and Pnina was sitting in the Ezrat Nashim. And later she told me that for the first 10 minutes, no one understood when I said Matzah, until finally there was like a hiss. Matzah, he speaks about Matzah. Okay. So hopefully here there is you'll be more understanding to my limitations. So we speak about Matzah, and Pesach is only, I don't want to get anyone here nervous, but it's less than 2 weeks. Less than 2 weeks from now. A side note, Bezrat Hashem will begin Mechirat Chametz this Tuesday, please God. And I would send all of that also in the general channels of the Kehillah, but speaking here, I would ask people to try to do the Mechira in advance as they can, because if nothing would change, then I would have to go to Miluim a day before Pesach. Yes, that's... So I won't be able to have any last minute efforts regarding Mechirat Chametz, just won't be here and won't be available. So that's an issue that would better be resolved earlier than later.
What if the goy wants to come during Pesach to get his stomach?
He can come.
You won't be here.
Yeah, I won't be here. The problem is not the goy, the problem is my wife. Okay. With the goy I can manage. Okay, I'm joking, of course. So, we speak about Matzah, and I think it is pretty well known that Matzah has two very different dimensions. When you speak about Matzah, it's already very apparent in the Haggadah. So we open the Haggadah in a statement, Ha-lachma anya. Right? We point at the Matzah and we say, this is the food of affliction, anya, poverty, that the achlu avatana, that was eaten by our forefathers, bi'ara de Mitzrayim. So the matzah is signaled out as lechem oni, as the food of the deprivation, of infliction, of poverty, and I mean that's obviously matzah is not. I mean, nowadays a matzah can cost you 10 times or 20 times bread, but at least in some basic meaning, a matzah is the food of the poor. And that is how the Avudraham is from Spain, was from Spain in around the 15th century, just before the expulsion. And here in source bet, Vim Tomar Maudi Achlu Avatana Be'ara de Mitzrayim. What does it is that we say that the matzah was the food eaten by our forefathers in the land of Egypt? Because what we are being told by Yefu et Abatzek, you remember that it's later told that they were not able to create chametz because there was not enough time. They have to rush out of Egypt. But that is after the redemption. So why do we say that the matzah is the food of the slaves? So says the Avudraham, Peresh Arav Rabbi Yosef HaEzoivi Beshem Ben Ezra, Shaya Shavui Behodu. So there is a story. Some explain that it is the famous Ibn Ezra. I don't think that necessarily that is so. Ben Ezra is it was a family name, a very known family name in Spain. So Rabbi Avraham ibn Ezra was from the Ben Ezra family, but there were many others that were from the Ben Ezra family. There was a very famous Moshe ben Ezra, who was a poet, and generation earlier to the famous Rabbi Avraham ibn Ezra. So I'm not sure who is the Ben Ezra here we speak about. However, this specific Ben Ezra, haya shavui behodu. So he was a captive in India, which I don't think is a good prospect, neither then nor now. So he was imprisoned in India, והיו מאכילים אותו לחם מצה, ולא נתנו לו לעולם חמץ. So he says that the prisoners in India were fed in matzah, and not on chametz. Why is that? והטעם, מפני שהוא קשה, ואינו מתעכל במהרה כחמץ, ויספיק ממנו מעט. You can eat a little portion of matzah, and it goes a very long way, because it's very hard to digest. So it takes a lot of time, and you can, I guess that's an experience that many of us are familiar with. Right? You eat a small portion of matzah, and that's good enough. So that's what Ben Ezra said. That's why the masters would give their slaves matzah to eat, because then you can give less food. That's an economic, that's just an economic consideration. וכן היו עושים, excuse me. In the case of an alarm, we will just enter into the mamad. No problem. No problem. Bezrat Hashem. Okay. Okay. That's the signs of the times. No, maybe, who knows, 10 years, 20 years from now, we record this shiurim. Okay, we record this shiurim. Someone would see them 10 years or 20 years from now. What was going on?
Hopefully it'll be a distant memory.
A distant memory. Be'ezrat Hashem. Be'ezrat Hashem.
This is what it was like before we won.
Before, exactly. That's like seeing a video from the enslavement in Egypt. Okay. So, they assume that just as in India, in the 50th century, they would give matzah to the slaves, so the Egyptians had the same idea, the same innovation, that they would give matzah to the slaves in order to cut on the economic expenses on the food of the slaves. That's the Avudraham. A different explanation, maybe a little simpler, was given by the Sforno. The Sforno is an Italian rabbi around 100 years later, after the Avudraham, so the 60th century. And he says, לחם, סוס ג', לחם שהיו אוכלים בעוני, שלא היה להם פנאי להשעות עיסתם עד שתחמץ מפני נוגסים עצים. So it just says very simply, the slaves don't have time. Right? Their taskmasters, they stand on them, they do not allow them the time to prepare food, so they eat matzah. I think I read a very similar description in one of these accounts of the slaves in America, in the United States, many 100 years later. And they speak, I don't think that they ate matzah, but they speak about having this very primitive, like oven, that they didn't have a lot of money. Each one would grain his own bread, and they would just pour it on the oven, and it would be something like a pancake or something like that we use. So I'm not sure it was an halachic kosher matzah, but it was a very, very simple plain bread, and that is simple. That is what we are describing here. So according to that idea, the matzah is a symbol to the enslavement. It's part of the memory of the suffering of Egypt. And that's how the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim explains why do we eat matzah on Pesach. Source Daled. I would share it also on the Zoom.
Yeah, he's talking about matzah, and matzah in India,
Sure.
400 years ago. when
Yeah.
they fed slaves, matzah.
Yes.
Two differences. One is
One is Oni and one is Aradi.
No, up to now it's all the same. Yeah, only lechem, only the bread of affliction, bread of slavery. So look at source Dalet here, the Moreh Nevuchim, says Rambam, Sukkot vePesach. So the holidays of Sukkot and of Pesach, maknim de'ah umidah. They were instated in order to give us, to teach us, to educate us. And de'ah here means not an opinion, but some truth and midah, and a personal trait. So, הדעה בפסח, what we are supposed to learn from Pesach, is זיכרון אותות מצרים והנצחתם לדורות. To learn about the miracles of us getting, הקדוש ברוך הוא getting us out of Egypt, and to remember them for eternity. And in Sukkot, what happened in the Midbar. But for us, what is important, hamidah. What is the character trait that Pesach is supposed to teach us? שהאדם יזכור תמיד את ימי המצוקה בימי הרווחה. So even when we are in time of freedom, we should always remember what we had when we were slave. A man should never forget where did he come from. That's a very important personal trait. Know where did you come from. And not only you personally, although many of us also have been born in very different places, times, and settings than the ones we are sitting in now, and one has to remember where he was born and what is the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took him, the journey that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had led him through his life. But also we as a nation, we must remember that we began as slaves in Egypt. And that's why, says Rambam, כדי שתגדל תודתו להשם, that in order to increase our thankfulness to Hashem, ויזכה בענווה, and to be humble, to remember our origin, to be humble, בהכנעה, באוכלו מצה ומרור בפסח. So Rambam marries the matzah and the maror. So because both of them represent the same idea, the same thing, which is the suffering of Egypt, the slavery of Egypt, כדי שיזכור מה שאירע לנו, so one will remember what had transpired to us. There are also, it's not only an idea that one has to remember when he eats the matzah and he says, ha-lachma anya, that is the food of affliction. Also, it carries halachic ramifications. So, for example, says Rambam in source Hey, mutar lalush ha'isa. So when you prepare the matzah, according to the Rambam, you are allowed to knead the isa, the dough, thank you, for Pesach in water, in oil, in honey, in milk, or to put it over, or lekatef. Lekatef, you can either knead with these dough with these juices, I don't know, with these mashkim, right? This type of liquids, thank you. Or after kneading, you can lekatef. You can smug it over, spread it over. So these are just ways of preparing nice foods, right? Nice breads. So it is not, according to the Rambam, we the Ashkenazim, maybe it won't surprise you, but we are machmir. So that is not allowed. I'm saying we, I apologize. But the Ashkenazim, for those of us that are unfortunate, so we are machmir, that all of that is considered the chametz, together with many other things. So, but according to the Rambam and to the Sfaradim, you are allowed to prepare this type of matzah as long as you are taking care that it would not be above 18 minutes for the baking.
You see the bready looking
Nicer. Yes,
you know.
yes. So we can lir'otam bilvad, right? Yes.
So where does the 18 minutes come from? I mean, in olden times they didn't have clocks.
That's right. They would look just at the dough and see if it begins to litfoach, right, rise, and B, they will try to estimate it by the time of walk. So 18 minutes is the time it will take you to walk a mile. That's the way that they estimated it. So you are right, they didn't have watches, but they were much better in estimating times. Just the way it is, when you have a technological advance, then you lose part of your abilities. I think all of us know that Waze had completely disrupted, right, our navigation, biological navigation system. So you just see the way it is. So watches did the same. We remember Waze and the life before Waze, and we do not remember life before clocks. But back at the time, people would be able to look at the sky and estimate with an hour gap here and there. For us, I think it would be somewhat difficult. Maybe we can acquire this expertise, but can you know the difference between 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 1 o'clock? It's difficult. I can easily see the difference between 11 in the morning and 2 afternoon because you see the sun going over. But in the summer days, the long summer days, between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock, that may be a little difficult. נכון. Okay, so but returning to our topic. So Rambam says that you are allowed to knead your dough with milk and honey. However, says Rambam, ביום הראשון אסור ללוש ולקטף אלא במים בלבד. For the first night, the matzah you eat and you make the bracha of אשר קידשנו וציוונו על אכילת מצה, there the matzah can only be made out of במים בלבד. Water only, of course. Don't. Okay, when we are going into the moment.
Yeah, there they're doing too. Upstairs.
בוא נראה.
Forget about the shoes. I had slippers there.
אם כולם יעמדו אז אני לא אשב.
It's over from the shul also, where he could.
Strange times indeed. אם כולם נכנסו הוא יסגור את הדלת. Okay, we should of course thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for being able to have an alarm and go into the mamad and protect ourselves. That's in itself, that's a miracle. No, it is. Your internet connection is unstable.
It's something we can complain about.
Yes. Well, yeah, that's
Yeah,
exactly. That's what I want to say. It's not the only unstable thing in this room. Okay, there is another network called Mevasser Wi-Fi, which is stronger here. So if you can connect, if you need, you can connect to it. Okay, so I will just continue. Now, what can we do, right? Continue and learn Torah. That's what we do. Okay, so although it is not chametz, according to the Rambam, it is not chametz to mix milk and honey into your matzah, but it is not chametz, but it is not matzah as well. Why? Because matzah must be lechem oni, the food of the poor. And if it has milk and honey, it's not a food of the poor anymore, it's food of the rich. It's a rich matzah. It's matzah ashira. That's how we call it. So that's why you cannot use it for the first matzah of Leila Seder in the first day. The matzah you need to perform the mitzvah of lechem oni, fulfill the mitzvah of lechem oni with, you cannot use this matzah mixed with milk and honey. Okay, so that's an halachic amplification of this concept of matzah as lechem oni. Very good. However, in the Haggadah itself, we find a complete different view of what the matzah is. It was already hinted by the Avud Raham, because we continue with the Magid. We began the Haggadah pointing the matzah, saying that is the food of affliction. Beautiful. And then we continue and you go on and on. For some families it can be very on and on and on and on. And then we come to Rabban Gamliel. And Rabban Gamliel teaches us that in order to completely fulfill the mitzvah of Leila Seder, כל שלא אמר שלושה דברים אלו בפסח, whoever didn't mention these three things did not fulfill his obligation. לא יצא ידי חובה. What are they? פסח, מצה ומרור. And then he explains, Pesach, why is Pesach important? What does Pesach symbolize? So Pesach is about HaKadosh Baruch Hu skipping the houses of the Israelites when he was striking the Bechorot, the firstborn of the Egyptians. So that's why Pesach. And then he says, I skip immediately to Maror in order to finish Matzah. Maror, he says, Vayemareru et chayehem, because they made their life bitter. That is Maror. What about Matzah? So we expect, we do not expect, because we had the Seder a few times, as my grandmother, my Savta, Zichrona Livracha, her Yorsa, was this last Friday. So in the last 10 years of her life, whenever I would ask her how does she feel, she would say something in Yiddish, and then she would tell me, I apologize, my Yiddish is very, very weak. So she translated it for me. She said, I ate too many afikomans. So we ate too many afikomans, right? So we know that he is going to say what the matzah is for. But let's imagine for a second that we have never read the Haggadah. So we read in the beginning of the Haggadah, so this is our first time with the Haggadah. We read in the beginning, this is the food of affliction. Ha-lachma anya. So now we come to Matzah Zol Shuma, and what do we expect? We expect him to say, Matzah Zo, for our forefathers ate matzah while they were slaves. That's what should have been written here. Instead, we read, Matzah Zo al Shuma, why do we eat this matzah? What does it signify? And we say, Al Shum shelo espik betzekam shel avoteinu lachamitz, עד שנגלה עליהם מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא וגאלם. It is not the food of affliction, it's the food of redemption, of salvation. That when they tried to make chametz, they were redeemed by Hashem before they had the time for the dough to rise. So they went out with the matzah, with the unleavened bread, and this is the food of redemption. That's what they ate when they became free people, liberated men. That is when they ate the matzah, not when they were slaves. So this is a complete diametrical views of what the matzah is. Is it the food of affliction, of poverty, of slavery, or is it the matzah of the bread of freedom? Now, this again, very interesting, has also halachic ramifications. So, for example, a very famous example, we all do it when we eat the, or supposed to do it when we eat the matzah. In Source Zayin, says Rambam, בכל דור ודור חייב אדם להראות את עצמו. So a person has not only to feel, he has to show himself. As he himself now left the Shi'abud Mitzrayim, right, in slavery in Egypt, as he says, ואותנו הוציא משם. We were taken out of Egypt. לפיכך, and that is why, כשסועד אדם בלילה הזה, when a person eats at this night of ליל הסדר, צריך לאכול ולשתות, והוא מסב דרך חירות. You need to recline, right, when you eat. And when do you recline? So we do not recline when we eat the maror, right? Of course, because the maror is not about freedom. The maror is about slavery. So you would not recline. Reclining while eating the maror, that's a contradiction. But we do recline when we eat the matzah. And the reason why do we recline when we eat the matzah is because matzah is a symbol of freedom, of liberation. But it is also a symbol of slavery. How can these two opposite things exist in one food, which is supposed to be very simple? Okay. So this is the basic question that we are facing when we speak about matzah. Is it halachma anya? Or is it the food of redemption?
It's exactly on the cusp between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So what would it be? Both or in the middle?
Exactly.
It's exactly on the.
Yeah.
I think that's what you said is exactly what the Maharal explains. That's beautiful.
There you go.
Yeah, no, it's exactly the Maharal. Okay, beautiful. For me, it's the punch of the shiur, so we would have to wait. No, but there is a few more things that I would like to say.
So yesterday,
Okay. So, I think we need to use here a very acute observation that was explained by Rav Soloveitchik. Now, I don't know, I don't have a direct quote, so I'm using here Harei Kedem. Harei Kedem was written by Rav Michael Shurkin, that's one of the students of Rav Soloveitchik, who published a 3-volume set of Rav Soloveitchik's insights into the holidays and Shabbat. It's called Harei Kedem. And in one of them, he has a short paragraph about this question that we are discussing here. So it's here in source Yud. Yes, thank you. He says, "B'matzah yesh et shnei ha'inyanim." So matzah consists of both of these aspects. מחד גיסא הוא הלחם של העינוי וקושי השיעבוד. מכל מקום מאידך גיסא, המצה היא גם כן סימן לגאולה. So the matzah is both the shi'abud, the slavery, but it's also the sign of redemption, just as we explained. ותמוה באמת, it's very puzzling. איך איכונו שני הדברים יחדיו, how these two things can live together. ונראה שבאמת החפצה של המצה הוא לחם עוני. So in truth, the matzah itself, it's called the hefza, right? The object of the matzah, that is really food of the poor. Rich people do not eat matzah. So the matzah is an object that is poverty food. ואם עשאה מצה עשירה, and if you do it with milk and honey, פסולה, ואין יוצאים בה. You cannot fulfill the mitzvah if it is not a food of the poor. כי זה היה מצבם האמיתי של עם ישראל במצרים. It was the objective state. The physical state of Am Yisrael in Egypt was the state of slavery. So the physical object you need to eat is, we can go out? Yes. Okay, so we now leave from slavery into redemption and continue. So let's move quickly.
Milk, you mean juice?
Milk and other juices as well.
You have milk and bread together?
We can, you mean because of kashrut of basar bechalav. If it's made in a specific form, like
Matzah is not.
so you do it in a triangle. There is no halacha, it must be round. I mean, some may think so, but
זה לא נפרד יותר טוב כשזה עגול או משהו?
לא חושב.
זה... חום הכדור שגם יותר מבוא צריך לצרוך הכל.
Okay, this is the whole thing is just a test for that stuff with difficulties of concentration.
You know, this is so significant for me. Regardless of everything, through the old and I was still studying, we're still doing what we have to do. Yesterday we went to shul, we were that, and even small kiddush we have. I mean,
You're right. You're absolutely right. We are what we are,
yes,
and they.
that's it. They exist. Unfortunately, they exist. But what can you do?
We're doing what we can.
Yeah, we're doing what we
We're
can.
doing what we can. Okay. So we continue with Rav Soloveitchik. He said the physical object of the matzah is food of the poor because the physical situation of Am Yisrael in Egypt was a situation of poverty, of enslavement. However, he said, אבל נראה שמעשה אכילת המצה דינה להיות בדרך חירות. So he says the food, the matzah, the object is enslavement. But our eating, not the chefetz, not the object, but the subject, the person who eats, he is acting in a way of freedom. So he reclines. And when you eat the matzah, you do not put it, our minhag is not to put it into the charoset. Right? Why? Because charoset is the symbol of the teeth, right? Of, I don't know, how do you say the teeth? The thing that clings the mortar? Yes. Mortar, like brick and mortar. Yeah. Okay, so that is the sign of the mortar. That's part of the slavery. So the Tur says that's why we do not dip the matzah into the charoset. Why? Because the matzah is, we should eat it in a way of freedom. The matzah itself is a matzah of slavery. But we as human beings discover, that's what Pesach reveals to us, that, says Rav Soloveitchik, that the question of slavery and freedom is not a question of the objective situation, it's the question of how do you relate. If you have God, if you have faith, then even when the physical situation is one of slavery, you can be free. Right? That's a second, as they say, the human body can be put into shackles, but the human spirit, if it clings to Hashem, would always remain free. Yes?
The question I had, first we have it plain, and then we have it as part of the sandwich. So I'm thinking, is it to show both aspects?
That's
of it,
beautiful.
or is it-
Yeah, that's a beautiful idea. Yes, that we eat matzah a few times during the Seder. Right? We have the first eating, and then we have the sandwich, right, the korech, and also we have the afikoman in the end. So we can try, and some of the mefarshim go just exactly in this direction, and they try to say maybe the first matzah is slavery and the last matzah is freedom, and it's a beautiful idea. It's a beautiful idea. Today I'm not going in this direction because the halachic examples that I gave, we recline in both the first matzah and the last matzah. And we do not dip in charoset in both the first matzah. So it may be that according to other poskim, then we can also develop other ideas, but at least according to our minhag, the Rambam did dip the first matzah into charoset. Yes, so that may be that he was going in this direction. But at least according to our minhagim, then we recline the first matzah, we do not dip in the first matzah. So it seems that we are trying to do both at the same time, not to split the difference between the first matzah and the last matzah, but have right, as you say, have the cake, have the matzah, and still keep it whole, right? So we are eating the matzah, as I said, as Rav Soloveitchik said, the matzah itself is the objective situation of poverty, of slavery, of affliction, but the subjective feeling need to be one of freedom, and that's in itself the lesson of Pesach. That you can eat the same matzah as a slave, it will be the same matzah as free man, and the question is, the difference is not in what you eat, is in how you eat it. Who you are, not what do you eat. That is extremely important when we speak about growth from difficulties. Because as long as we give the external difficulties to manage us, to define who we are, then we are slaves. We are slaves to the externalities. But if we understand this lesson of Pesach, that you can eat the same matzah, right? And I once heard this talk about that from Rav Yaakov Medan, our Rosh Yeshiva in Har Etzion. And he has a very vivid language, and he described very beautifully how the slaves in Egypt, Am Yisrael in Egypt, they were dreaming about a day. One day they would eat chametz, as the Egyptian taskmasters eat. Right? They would eat their matzah, and they would see the taskmaster eat chametz, and they would dream about this chametz. And they would say, one day would come. Right? They had hope in the redemption. And here, the day comes. And finally they sit down, and the Egyptians are struck by the Makat Bechorot, and they sit to prepare their chametz. Finally, eventually, they would be able to eat as kings, as Egyptians. And Moshe Rabbeinu says to them, no, now we have to leave. You have to still continue to eat this hastened food of matzah. And they say, but you promised us liberty. Liberty is chametz. And he said to them, liberty is not about just what we just said. Liberty is not about what you have, it's about who you are. And that is the lesson. Yeah.
I'll tell you a little story that reminds me of this. My husband, when he's in Lebanon, they get, as you know, a little sausage and a bit of lafa or pizza or something, and the soldiers get the food, and the soldiers grab the food and they just shove it down and carry on. But he was with some Ethiopian guys, and every meal that they got, they washed their hands, they sat down, they took out something clean, they put the pita and they put the sausage on the pita. They fold it up. They really sat down and ate like they were eating in the fanciest restaurant in the
Beautiful.
world. And like, you know, it just made my husband really stop and appreciate that.
It's a beautiful idea.
Yes.
That's a beautiful idea. Yes, that's exactly what we are speaking here about.
Yeah.
So it's the question of how do you see yourself? And of course, when you speak about Pesach, it's about your faith in God, because really, if you do not have a God, it's very difficult to set yourself free from this world, because if the only thing you have is this world, if everything is materialistic, it's about material, then who you are is dictated by the material situation you are in. That was the whole one of the most basic pillars of the communist idea, that your mind is dictated by your material status. That's why who you are is dictated by your walk in life, right? Your status. However, we do not believe in that. We believe that if you have a faith in Hashem, then the externalities, they are important. Of course they're important. We are in this world. But we begin with who we are, and then we act outwardly. And not that what is outside of us dictate what we are. That's the big difference. If you have a Kadosh Baruch Hu, then you are able to be free from within and then to act outside, and not to let what is outside to decide who you are. That is I think, that is the most important lesson, that Pesach, that the Matzah, being both the bread of affliction and the both of freedom, at the same food, that's what it can teach us. I was thinking, when I was preparing the shiur yesterday night, I was thinking to myself, that we have this very modern notion that is called reclaiming, right? Reappropriation. Yeah, maybe you're familiar with that. Right? So, for example, there is something that was injuring to you, that was... yes, and then you say, I'm taking it back, and now I own it. So, for example, it's a very deep psychological phenomenon. It's also a cultural phenomenon. Now, it's many times being used in a very, very progressive way that maybe sometimes be ridiculous. But in truth it is a very deep psychological phenomenon. For example, you see sometimes soldiers, and they would take some type of a memorial, right? Some type of a momentum, right, from their service. And sometimes it would be, people would sometimes skip. They would hit by a bullet. And there would be a surgery, and the bullet would be taken out, and the guy would keep the bullet in his home, in a door. And why? Throw it, jump on it. Why do you keep it? Because he survived, right? And he keeps it. He's reclaiming. This was the thing that risked my life, that was threatening my life, but now I own it. I tell not the bullet tells the story about me, I tell the story about the bullet. That is reclaiming. Having the matzah, one can take the difficulties that he had in his life and try to forget them, try to ignore them, try to overlook them, and sometimes there is no other choice. Some people that came out of the Holocaust, of other very extreme situations, they were not able to speak about them, because the trauma was so strong that the mind was not able, the soul was not able to reorganize it. So you had to completely shove it into a drawer. But the truth is that if one is able to, it depends on the trauma, it depends on the human being. But if one is able to, obviously it is better to face the difficulties and to own them, to reclaim them. Because if you cannot speak about the experiences that you had, then you cannot grow from them. But if you are able to take them and to speak about them, if you are able to eat the matzah, we could have just said, the matzah is the food of slavery, now we are free, so one is not allowed to have matzah on Pesach. Right? That would make sense. It's the Chag Zman Cheruteinu, the time of our freedom, so matzah is not allowed. But instead, what Hashem told us is, you are not allowed to eat chametz, and you must eat matzah on the festival of our freedom, on Zman Cheruteinu. Because we need to re-own our trauma, our difficulties, our pain, our suffering, to reclaim them. It's ours. It's ours. We are the masters of the suffering, and not the suffering is the master of us. That is what eating the matzah is about. And so I think about this idea, this notion of reclaiming. And I was looking at the Seder, and I thought matzah is, for example, the Gemara says, seen here in source Yud Bet, Amar Shmuel, lechem oni, so it means the food of the poor. But Shmuel has a nice drasha, a sermon. He says, lechem she'onim alav, dvarim arbe. So in Hebrew, oni can also mean la'anot, to answer, to speak. Many times when someone is in suffering, then he's in shame for his suffering. There is no good reason for it. It's not logical. It's just, again, human psychology. We are ashamed about the troubles that we have. We do not want to speak about that. We want to forget. We want to push that aside. We want it to be ignored. And matzah is just the opposite. We put the matzah, we put the suffering in the center of the table, and we speak about it during the whole Seder. Lechem she'onim alav dvarim arbe. And we cover it, and then we re-expose it. So it becomes the center of the Leil HaSeder. Also, the matzah becomes, that's what we begin with, right? Halach ma'anya di'ach la'avatana b'mitzrayim, kol dichfin yeitei v'yechol. Everyone who is hungry, come and eat. The matzah becomes the engine for helping others. So if I suffered, what does it mean? It's not, people can come out of suffering and saying, if I suffered, I need to take care of myself. And it is true. We need to take care of ourselves. But the next step is to say, if I suffered and I understand what suffering means, then giving meaning to my suffering is to help others that suffer. The Torah has more than 40 times, the Torah speaks about that we need to help the stranger and the foreigner. Why? Because you were strangers in Egypt. Ki gerim eitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. And we must remember that we were slaves in Egypt. So comes the Shabbat, let your slave have a rest. Let your worker have a rest. Why? Because the Torah says, "V'zacharta ki eved hayita b'Mitzrayim." You remember you were a slave? You remember what does mean a day of rest for a slave? So give it to others. So that's another way of reclaiming, that we take our suffering and we say, they would not control us and make us people that are ashamed of ourselves, that are inwardly, that cannot go outside. No, the opposite. Because of what we have gone through, we understand the need of others and we are there for them. And the third thing, a very interesting one, is the Maharal, as we said, that I would like to end with. So the Maharal, in the last source here, in source Tetvav, Ulai יקשה לך, you see? Maybe it would be difficult to you. מה עניין העניות אל החירות? What is the connection between poverty and freedom? That's basically the whole concept of this shiur, right? How these two can live at the same object, at the same matzah. והלא שני הפכים הם. They are diametrical opposed, החירות והעניות, freedom and poverty. הלא דבר זה אין קשה, that's not a difficulty. כי העניות בעצמו הוראה אל הגאולה. He says poverty has everything to do with redemption. Why? Poverty is about redemption. Why? He says שאין עניין הגאולה רק שיוצא ואין לו שום צירוף לזולתו. He says when you speak about freedom in Pesach, we're not speaking about being free. We speak about this moment of transformation from slavery into freedom. And in this moment of transformation, שאין עניין הגאולה רק שיוצא ואין לו שום צירוף אל זולתו, לא כמו העבד שאינו עומד בעצמו ויש לו צירוף אל זולתו, הוא האדון. לכך הדבר שיש בו עשירות אינו עומד בעצמו, רק יש לו צירוף אל קניינו, ואין בזה גאולה. He says, there is a sense in which the poor can gain redemption more than the rich. Because the rich, he is enslaved to his property, to his wealth. And so he cannot be redeemed. Because again, he is dictated. As long as he believes that who he is dictated by what he has, then he is not free, regardless of how much money he would have. When he says it was the slavery in Egypt, it was the matzah of the slavery that let us discover who we really are. Just as the matzah is the most essential ingredients you need in order to make bread. It's down to the most basic. Water and flour, that's it. If you put another thing, as we said, it's possible. You go to the bare bones. And affliction, suffering, that's what it does to you. You feel that you feel, or indeed you lose everything you have. But it's not everything you have, because in the end you find that you have yourself. And you have, as we say, your faith. And that cannot be taken from you. And in that way, the suffering themselves can become a leverage for redemption. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to stay poor. The Torah, that's not what the Torah teaches us. The Torah says you should go to Eretz Israel, Eretz Zavat Chalav Udevash. Right? You should go to a land that is full with milk and honey. The same things that shouldn't be in the matzah. But once a year, for a week, go back to the simplest form of existence. So you would know that all the wealth and the property and the milk, and that's beautiful to have, but they do not write down who you are. They do not set who you are. Who you are is beyond what you have. And this is, says the Maharal, this is the lesson of the Matzah that stands there in the gateway. It is, I think, the nice English word is liminal. In the there is such the liminal place, which is that is the transformation between two areas. So you have the slavery and you have the freedom, and the Matzah stands exactly in the middle, in the gateway. Because the Matzah is the bridge that can get you from slavery. That you while you were free, you were not able to have the Matzah. Because when you were free, when you were rich, then you began to form this type of equations. So I am who I am because it doesn't necessarily about wealth. Let's say I'm a teacher. So I am who I am because I can teach. And then chas v'chalila, one loses his ability to teach for whatever reason. So who is he? It's an identity crisis. And if you have faith, you can discover who you are, again, in the most inner form. Even if everything would be taken, chas v'chalila, no one of us wants to be in such of a extreme situation. But Pesach is a symbol of that. Even if everything would be taken, if you have your faith in Hashem, then you have the freedom. And after you have the freedom, then you can again come back out of this pain, of this suffering, and as we said, re-own them and make them into an engine of growth. I think that is the lesson of Matzah, which plays this double role of slavery and of freedom. So with that we end our exploration into Matzah. Now I would make a short poll. Next week on Sunday, this is 3 days before Leila Seder. Can we have a shiur, or that's too close? Yes? Okay, so Be'ezrat Hashem would have the last shiur in the series about maror. This is facing the real suffering, right? The question of maror, and if some of you eat chen, this is real suffering. So that's what I'm going to speak about. So we would speak about maror, about the question of how, in the end, how should we integrate the suffering into the korech, as was mentioned earlier. How can we integrate the suffering into our life? We would prefer not to have, but we live in this world. So how they can be integrated, that's the question from Be'ezrat Hashem for next week. And we all hope and pray that those that were injured, Be'ezrat Hashem, would have a speedy and full recovery, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu would give peace al Am Yisrael and for the whole world. Have Shavua Tov and relaxing cling for Pesach.
Continue playing for Pesach.
Thank you very much.
כל טוב.
Baruch, thank you. It's an outstanding shiur again. Thank you.
Thank you. תודה רבה.
Wonderful shiur. Thank you very much.